is that this is being recorded so that we can post the recording to the website for those who were not able to attend. There is quite a bit of information to get through today, so for the sake of time, we will address questions at the end of the presentation. But of course, as you think of things, feel free to enter those into the Q&A function, and we'll either type a response or address it at the end of the session. The project webpage listed on this slide also has a lot of information, so we can share that link in the chat as well, and then you can spend some time reading through that after the session if you wish. With that, I'll turn it over to Robin Fergus, Vice President for Human Resources. And thanks again, Robin.
Thank you very much, Brittany. Welcome, everyone. We're glad you've joined us this afternoon. I was going to say this morning, but it's already the afternoon. Today, we have a very robust presentation to share about a project that's been ongoing for approximately the past 2 years. Over the pandemic period, we have had a group of very dedicated committee members who have endeavored to review a very complete a very in-depth analysis of our current DCP retirement plans, and we'll share more about that work and talk about where we've arrived at for current state, and make sure that we leave room for questions, as Brittany indicated. I'm here today presenting with my colleague, Joseph DeVerde. Joseph is an associate professor in the chemistry department, and he served very generously as our committee chair for this project and has done a phenomenal job of leading the effort. So very grateful for Joseph and the entire committee's work and dedication. And we also have our partner, Wendy Dominguez, here. Wendy is a principal with the Innovest Solutions Group, and Innovest has been a guiding partner for us throughout this project. So very glad to have Wendy here to share her expertise as well. I'll start off by sharing a little bit of a brief history of the work and turn it over to Wendy and Joseph to go into more in-depth details about the project. So how we've arrived at today, as I mentioned, this committee has been doing a deep dive review of our current retirement landscape, and that does not include the para landscape. This is solely for the defined contribution plan, which was implemented back in the early 90s. And while we do a comprehensive annual reviews and checks of our plans, this was the first time that we had taken a dive into evaluating all components of the partnerships that we have with our multi-vendor environment. So this is, as I said, a very comprehensive review that's been conducted, and with the intention to update and modernize the programming to ensure that we have the best possible offerings for our workforce. All of us plan participants who participate in the Denver defined contribution plan and or the 403B plans offered by those same vendors. When this was brought to the university in the early 90s, this was a change that was reflective of higher education plans at the time. So previously we had had only para in our landscape, and we introduced the defined contribution plan to allow savings for our administrative professional and faculty workforce. At that time, the fund choices were somewhat limited, only 27 funds in the plan, and they've grown exponentially over the years. Joseph will talk a little bit more about that. We've also seen some significant shifts in the landscape since the early 90s, which is another reason we took on this deep dive and review. We're seeing changes in the makeup of these plans, not only with higher education institutional peers, but also in the private sector. So that was part of the reason why we wanted to endeavor into this project. And we want to make sure, first and foremost, that our plan participants, us, the employees of the university, are prepared for retirement when the time comes. This is a very important component of our working lives. We're all putting away money as we embark upon those retirement years, and we need to be good stewards of those funds and programs. So I am excited to share that this work has has had a lens for not only the current workforce, but also for our retirees, because we have a duty to ensure that the programs are supporting those individuals as well. Next slide. So this work began, as I mentioned, in the I think in the height of the pandemic. So we were working virtually. As such, the project has taken a little longer than we would have liked. But where we are today here in the fall of 2022 is preparing the recommendations of the committee to send over to our Board of Governors for review. We had a focus, as I mentioned, on the defined contribution plans, but that also involves the 403B offerings, which are supplementary programs offered by our 3 vendors, and the student employee retirement plan. Some of you may not be aware, but our students who work for the university also have an obligation to contribute out of their paycheck to a retirement fund that is specific to student employment. The reason why we have a defined contribution plan is we are a non-Social Security employer. And so we contribute to these plans in lieu of Social Security. We have had, as I mentioned, just phenomenal group of our colleagues work on this project, and they were comprised of people from our university benefits committee, as well as our faculty council, administrative council, and an individual from our financial world has supported this effort as well. And Joseph will talk more about the committee makeup in a few slides. The focus primarily was, as I said, to make recommendations to update and modernize the plans. And we used data from a detailed participant survey that was sent out to the workforce, as well as we've hosted educational webinars throughout the project. And we worked closely with Innovest to create a request for qualification, which is guided by our procurement rules. And we put out a request to find information from not only the current vendors, but any other vendor that might be interested in participating in our landscape. And of course, with the procurement process, there are very strict rules about confidentiality. And we need to make sure that we follow and adhere to those rules throughout the plan project until a decision has made by our Board of Governors. Next slide. As I was sharing, we sent out this request for qualification, and it was done with the intention that we could potentially add or delete the record keepers of the program. And those are the vendors that I've been referring to. We have 3, TIAA, Fidelity, as well as AIG, or you may know AIG as VALIC. And those other offerings were opened up to the broader financial community, retirement plan community, to see if they were interested in learning more about working with CSU as well. Once our recommendations have been reviewed by our senior leadership team and the board, it is up to the Board of Governors to make the final decision about a plan approval for which record keeper or record keepers will continue to serve our environment. So Joseph will talk a little bit more about that process on a later slide. Once we have a formal approval from the Board of Governors, we will work diligently with the selected vendor or vendors to have a very robust communication plan that is shared out with the community. Similar to how we're hosting these webinars this fall, we will do a very broad campaign with opportunities for plan participants to learn more about the decisions. The reason why we're here today is to make sure, following the pandemic, we know many of you were virtual and some continue to be virtual, but there was a lot going on, and we wanted to use this fall semester to socialize the work of the committee to make sure everyone has the opportunity to learn more about the work before the recommendations are moved forward to the Board of Governors this semester. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wendy. And Wendy will share a little bit more about Innovest's role in this project and the work that they have and the work that they support.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you. My name is Wendy Dominguez, and I'm the president and co-founder of Innovest. And we specialize in helping retirement plans navigate these, ever-changing waters, and really just want to make sure that whatever is available to you as participants is the best it could potentially be. We work in a fiduciary capacity. We have no products. We have no relationships with any retirement plan vendor or investment product. And because of that, we can be advocates for the university and the participants in making sure, again, the plan is modernized and the best that it could potentially be. We specialize in public plans. And in fact, I would go further to say we specialize in higher ed institutions. So we're very, very aware of the issues facing organizations like yours. Joseph, would you like me to continue on, or
Yes,
would
you have a few slides to go through, Wendy. Yeah, please
Okay.
do. Please do.
Okay, great. Thank you. I mentioned being a fiduciary, and that is an important distinction. And everybody that was serving on the committee, as well as us in our role, have a fiduciary responsibility, and that is a higher level. It really comes down to two main duties: a duty of loyalty. So the decisions and recommendations we make are with the 100% with the loyalty of the participants and their beneficiaries in mind. And then a duty of prudence, which means that we follow a prudent process in order to come up with any recommendation. So if we do execute on those two things, we'll be 95% of the way under the fiduciary rules and regulations. The next page, as part of that, I mentioned that we have a duty to follow a prudent process, and part of that is doing a request for qualification. So not just handpicking and asking questions in a haphazard way. We wanted the ability to evaluate the proposers and the marketplace in a very diligent and detailed way. And so with that, we asked a lot of questions. We asked about education. We asked about cybersecurity. We asked about their organization. We asked about their website. We evaluated the service professionals and their ability to serve not only the university, but also participants. And then we looked at fees. On the next page, part of the process too was asking employees for feedback. What is it that they wanted to see in this plan? Most were wanting more communication. We also saw that they wanted help individually to navigate the options. Most didn't understand their investment options and didn't even understand the choices that were available to them. And also most wanted lower fees as well as additional services if available. They also talked about the quality of investment options versus quantity. And all of these themes were then wrapped up in the back of our minds as we were making recommendations. Next slide. So the environment has changed, I would say, over the years, and it's really been a result of the changes and we've seen on all institutions. I mean, not just higher ed, but other organizations that are working towards making the retirement plan a better vehicle for the participants. And through that, the modernization, I would say, of our industry, we're trying to reduce complexity. We're trying to make sure that we're understanding the compliance requirements, selecting the best investment options for participants, and a lot of that has to do with costs and the ability to create economies of scale. And there are more fiduciary responsibilities, and we've seen many class action lawsuits brought forward of other universities related to how they were running their plans. And so we're trying to navigate all of that in this current environment. Next slide. you know, again, we want to just make this plan the best that can be for your participants. So that talks, we want to improve communication. We want to provide better guidance and financial advice to participants. We want to streamline and modernize the plan and use that scale, as I talked about, to create efficiencies both for participants and for the administration of the plan. Next page, I will turn it over to Joseph.
Okay, thanks very much, Wendy, for that handoff, and thanks, Robin, for your earlier kind comments. I'm going to speak from the perspective of the committee that was impaneled by our HR department to perform a review and to spearhead this review with the able participation of many of others. Next slide, please. So I will cover some of the same territory, and I'll do so with a slightly different vantage point or viewpoint, and in some greater detail in some cases. In other cases, I'll zip through quickly for expediency. But as been mentioned, CSU has a retirement plan. We, the employees of the institution, participate in a retirement plan. And as it turns out, some of the rules that we operate under, many of the rules, are imposed upon us from external sources. For example, the IRS requires certain things of us, and other state institutions, national and state institutions. All employers in this broad country here are required to have some sort of not all employees, all employees are supposed to participate in some sort of a retirement plan. It is considered to be best practice, and it is considered to be by law that we all participate. Many of us in the United States here participate in Social Security. CSU, by virtue of state legislative fiat, does not participate in Social Security. And thus, the university has had to look for alternate options. Earlier days, there was the PARA plan, which exists to this day, which is a state plan of public education retirement employees. In the early 90s, as was mentioned, CSU created the defined contribution plan, and that was intended to replace PARA to address certain issues. There were some issues at the time identified that needed some work to it. I'm going to jump over to a question which just came through Q&A, and that is, why does CU have Social Security? And the answer is because the state legislature did not prohibit CU from participating in Social Security as it did for CSU. Not our choice. We have to live with the many consequences. So as employees, also we're going to use the term participants, but participants are employees and them are us. The staff, faculty and staff of the university are the participants, and we are required to participate 8% to our contribution. That's 8% of our gross income each year. As it turns out, nice little spiff here is the university throws in 12% for those employees who are eligible for that. That's called a match. And you're going to hear a lot of technical terms, and you're going to hear me complaining about technical terms, but there are a bunch of them. So match eligible is one of the things that we have, some of us have, and the university adds to that. There's also a voluntary savings plan. Everyone's required to participate in the defined plan. The voluntary plan is for those who have the assets, have the income available, and want to put some juice into their retirement plans for later on. We also have the Student Employee Retirement Plan, the SERP, as it's called. That's part of the process. You'll see many of the students, undergraduate and graduate, around the campus, some work-study students, GTAs, many of them, depending upon some very detailed rules, which I don't have the time nor inclination to review, but some of them participate in the SERP. Next slide, please. The committee membership is broad and deep. There were 5 of us on the committee. I represent faculty, Sue Doe, faculty council chair. Catherine Duras was the former AP chair. Bolivar Senor was he's retired now, enjoying the benefits that he has accrued. He was the chair of UBC, University Benefits Committee, and Lacey Snyder, a financial expert from the administration. We were enabled by CSU human resources staff, by human resource. Robin, Bill Liley, and Terry Scher helped us immeasurably during this process, guided the committee, and left us alone when we asked and when we needed to. And then in addition to that, Wendy and her crew at Innovest were also deep partners. Wendy, Gordon Tuell, and Troy Jensen, all very, very helpful in the process of educating us and keeping us in line to execute our fiduciary responsibilities. Thanks to all of them. Next slide, please. So the present situation is that we have these plans. They were instituted a few decades ago, and they've been examined, they've been monitored. People have not been asleep at the wheel. They've been handled properly over the past years, but was decided a few years back to institute the project to do a deep dive into the plans and to see what could be done to update them. Over the course of those several decades, those of us who have been around long enough have recognized that the financial investment landscape, in the broadest speaking terms, has changed. Personal investing has changed. Tools have arisen. Styles have changed. There has been a shift from having, in general, not exclusive, but having experts make decisions for us individually, to many of us making decisions for ourselves. Big changes in the macro landscape. It's also changed, as Robin mentioned, in higher education. Some of those changes reflect the national changes. Some of the changes at CSU reflect those higher education changes. The plan characteristics themselves have evolved over the course of time. The number of active funds has increased. I don't even use it exponentially. I say it's explosive. We have 10 times as many funds available today, as we have 10 times as many invested in today. The availability and ones invested, you'll see there's a subtle difference there. Additionally, the administration costs have risen substantially. And let me take a moment to explain what that means. Administration costs are very specific things, and don't confuse them with others. If you are a private investor and decide you want to go invest in some stock, these days, all you need to do is call up a place like E-Trade and pay a certain few dollar fee, and you can execute a trade. You can own stock. If you want to get involved in a different type, like a mutual fund, right, which is a fund that someone in his or her infinite wisdom has put together a combination of investments to make a fund that's aggregated together, you have to pay that person for that thinking about putting it together. That's a fund fee. If you're part of a university here, you not only do you pay those fees, but we have to pay to administer our plan. It costs money for the people who keep our records, the record keepers, so-called record keepers. They keep track of the bags of money that have our names on them, and they're driven around with trucks, and they keep track of what's there and how much we've borrowed against them and how much we've invested and where we've invested them. That's the fund management fee. And I'm sorry, that's the plan management fee, excuse me. And that's the administration cost, the fees. Use those terms here virtually interchangeably, but with a little care. Those have risen over the past several decades. And we want to talk about those a little bit more. So the committee reviewed all the planned aspects of the administration, right? And we wanted to work on having good choices, good performance, education, and be compliant. All right, next slide, please. as chair, one of the prime things I did at one point was to give us some sort of a, I call it the lodestar, what we were following. And we asked the question is, what things can we lay into place in a framework so that our employees, our colleagues, our friends, in some cases, our relations, our personal relatives, what can they have the best possible performance of a plan, which means how can they enjoy their retirement with some financial stability? That was the thing we wanted to do. Next slide, please. There are kind comments have been made about what the committee has done, and I'll say I'm appreciative of them, but they're not wrong. This was a tough job. It was a lot of work for the committee, and it was some very detailed technical information that had to be studied up and learned upon. But being university employees, we tend to be some of the smart ones in the group, and so we all kicked in there. I know those of you who are geoscientists will not get this joke, but the rest of us understand that I don't know what olivine is, and I don't know what feldspar is. So we had to learn what a record keeper was, what an administrator, all these different various terms, 401k, acronyms and numbers flew by quickly. Next slide, please. Having developed our primary overall institutional and committee goal, we needed to blow that out into some details, all right? We set out to do some things that we know are available today, 20 years, 30 years after the initiation of the plan. We wanted to go through and set up a process by which there could be a lineup of investment choices that we call best in class. The idea is that for those employees who do not wish to get heavily involved in figuring out their investments, there is a baseline that they can jump into and have good stuff. By best in class, we mean specifically best financial performance. This is a retirement plan, and we're talking about dollars. So the primary activity is financial performance. We'll talk about some other secondary activities also, or areas. We wanted to also go in here and rationalize the investment choices. We want to make it easy for those new employees, our younger colleagues, our junior colleagues, or even our older colleagues who are coming in here, to make it easy to get them to start investing. We want to offer a rich palette of investments that match personal choices, and we want to create a mechanism by which the sophisticated investors, and there are sophisticated investors in our cohort, we want to give them the tools that they can do all the investing and play with that to their heart's content, while also altogether maintaining lower administration fees. So there's a balancing act here between features and costs. There's an old project development adage. There are three choices. There's features, there's price, and there's delivery time. Pick two. So we wanted to balance that out and be able to get as much as we can. We have recognized that there are some different employee categories amongst us, and we had to make sure that we take that into account. We also wanted to increase educational resources to help those who want it. And lastly, but not leastly, we want to protect the already retired employees, our colleagues and friends who've already gone past that, and we want to make sure that their interests are secure. Next slide, please. So in brief, our current plan looks like this. We have three companies, AIG, Fidelity, and TIA, which serve as keepers of the records. They keep track of our investments in the plan. That needs to happen. There is no master administrator. There's another technical term. And for those who are Lord of the Rings aficionados, it's sort of like one ring to bind them all. A master administrator would be an entity that would lord over the other record keepers, but we don't have one. So enough said about that. As Robin and I both mentioned, we have over 300 investment options currently in use across those three record keepers. and they reflect a wide variety of different investment options. The 403, the voluntary plan, it also has another 300 options. Some overlap, some not. There's a lot of stuff out there. There are some of those, many of those, some number of those investments are proprietary. And that means that they're offered only by that company. And we want to, and we thought of it as an articulated the value that we would limit those kinds of proprietary investments. We wanted to have a clean separation between the people who keep our records and the people who try to sell us things. And so we want to keep that in as much as possible. You'll learn as we keep talking, some of that cannot be disentangled for a number of complicated technical reasons, but real reasons and honest reasons. At the bottom of the page here is an example of the administrative costs for the plan. In this one particular year, recent year, not last year, but a recent one, cost us $3 million in administrative costs to keep track of those trucks of money driving around the state, keeping us in that system. We'd like to reduce that number, and we figured out ways that we can reduce that number. Next slide, please. I see a bunch of questions coming in, but I can't divert my attention from the slides. So other folks in the team are answering those. This here, I call this an experiential slide. It's a very, very fine detail, which reflects the number of investments. This is a partial list of number of investments across the 3 record keepers. And it also includes, and you can barely make out, the number of participants in each fund. In some funds, there are multiple thousands of investors from our institution in there. At the bottom left of the corner there are 3 investors in that particular fund. That's a fund that a couple of sophisticated investors decided they wanted to get into. So we have a wide range in there. Next slide, please. As was mentioned, there was an employee survey was conducted in October of 2020. You can think back to all the things that were going on then, and thank you for some of you who took a few moments to fill out the survey. We learned a lot in there, and that some of those have been stated, and I'll just reiterate them. That our friends and colleagues felt like they could use more information about making about what's options available, how this whole thing works. There's a lot of questions on this. Most of us, this is not our subject area of expertise, and so we have to rely on others, hopefully honest brokers, who will help us learn how to do these things. And that's what we're trying to get through there. And we also recognize that there are some folks who are pretty sharp on these things and want the rope to invest as much as they want to go. Next slide, please. There are a lot of detailed data there. I point to the first question here, and that is, why did you choose a particular record keeper? Because when we signed up here, when we joined the university, you may not remember, but one of the pieces of paper that you got, or one of the pages on a website, was, how do you want to invest your retirement funds? I don't know. What do I have retirement funds? Many folks say, so, a substantial number of folks didn't have a reason for picking one versus the other. Some folks did have a reason. We have a broad expanse of interest level in our colleagues. So we need to manage need to manage a plan that satisfies as many of them as possible. We'll do that. Next slide, please. Education is truly important, because this slide here is for the quants among us, and there are bunches of us. But what it tells you is, this is a model of our retirement plan, our defined plan. This is the mandatory part. And it looks at, for every $10,000 of annual salary that a participant has, and that does not include the university contribution, but this model does include that. For every 10K over the course of a couple of decades of service in the university, you can see every one of those 10Ks amounts to a number of 100Ks at the end of a number of decades. And that's great. That's what some people like to call the miracle of compound interest. And it's a lot of fun when you're on the right side of it. If you look at those family of curves there's a parameter associated with them, and it's the annual return rate. The annual return rate is literally that. What's the investment return on that? And you can see the return at the end of the term, 40 years, 30 years, depends critically on that return rate. The important point here is the money that we spend on plan administration fees reduces the annual return rate. And so that's a strong motivation for us to get that number reduced, because that's money that should be going into our pockets or into the bags, which are in the trucks, which are being driven around the state. That's where that money should be going, and we want to do that. Next slide, please. So to go forward, the committee has made its recommendations to HR. We talked about modernizing the plan to reduce administrative costs, to simplify the plan, to increase participant knowledge, to provide an adequate level of participant choice. And that's for the simple investors or the complicated investors, both sides. And we need to protect current assets and for the existing employees. We can't screw up anything that's already out there. We made the recommendations. We sent them to HR. HR looked them over, sent them to the Board of Governors. So the recommendations are in the hands of the Board of Governors. Next slide, please. What we're going to have here is an example of how we might accomplish some of this broad access to a variety of systems. We've defined, and this is an example, this is a model, this has yet to be ratified. We can't ratify things until the board has made its decisions. But we've identified, here's one way that we could do this. We could establish 3 tiers of investors and investments. Tier 1 is a couple of simple investments that are good, solid investments. You could have an S&P 500 index fund. There's nothing wrong with an S&P 500 index fund, so long as you're not paying a lot of fund fees. Different vendors offer the same fund at widely different fees. Best in class means we pick the ones that are in lower fees. And second is a tier 2 type of investor, an investor with a degree of interest and sophistication to pick among a variety of different kinds of financial tools. In here, you hear things about large cap, medium cap, small cap. These are capitalizations, which again is another technical term in there. And even though I have an MBA, I don't even understand half of these things. You might also be interested in a fund that achieves a social purpose. There are some folks who want to invest in funds that don't involve tobacco. Some don't want to do petroleum products. We have to make a reasonable attempt at addressing those legitimate needs by our colleagues and fellow employees, and balance that with the cost of administering those. So we have to work on those. And the third tier is for the folks who just can't be held back. That is what's termed a portal in the jargon of the field. And in that case, they'd be able to go in there and go crazy and pick all the things they want. It's a way of doing it. Next slide, please. So we had a timeline, as Robin mentioned, this hit at the same time the pandemic did, and it slowed us down enormously. Everything was done virtually, but we've gone, and as I said, the board has our recommendations. The board does not answer to us and will make its decision when it feels like it. We are trying to get them to do that and encourage them with all due diligence and discipline to do that in Q4 of 22. Provided they do that, there will be an actual switchover. Now that could be the same number of record keepers, it could be fewer record keepers, it could be more record keepers. It could be a bunch of different dimensions, a bunch of different parameters that they will decide, and we will have to respond to their decision. The switchover would be expected to take place in Q2 of next year. And as Robin mentioned, there will be a lot of information coming out, detailed information on how things will change, how the change will be, the mechanics of that, how that'll happen. Some things will have to happen, like some funds will be discontinued and moved over, and they would be moved over to an equal to or better fund. I have received assurances, that was a key question of mine, is to ensure that will always be making funds better for individuals, not putting them into worse funds. Some funds cannot be changed. This process is called mapping, and some funds will be mapped, some can't be mapped for logistical, legal, and IRS reasons. It's a complicated space. We can expect to see a lot of information, both from our own HR department and from our existing and future record keepers. I expect, and we will ensure as much as with all of our diligence to make sure that there is plenty of information out there, probably more than you want. There's information on the HR website. There we are on the lower left there, the retirement plans review. We've got our little space in posterity there. Next slide, please. So in closing, thanks for your attention, for not throwing raw vegetables virtually or physically, and for participating in this. And I'll throw the floor open for questions. Some of them are being asked and answered, and Robin and Wendy will also join us, and perhaps Bill and Terry also to answer more questions.
Great, thank you, Joseph and Wendy, much appreciated. Brittany, I know that the team has been actively answering questions in the chat. Are there any questions that you'd like us to answer live?
Yes, thanks to all of you. We have answered some via text that we can, of course, reiterate in a moment, just so it's on the recording and everyone can hear it out loud. But first, a couple of comments. So one, Joseph, your analogies were much appreciated, and there's some laugh out louds out there. The second for you, Robin, was a thank you for your leadership the past few years, and sad to see you go, which we share that sentiment. So just wanted to share those really quick.
Thank you.
The questions pending out there: will reducing admin costs increase retirement funds?
I guess I didn't say that clearly enough. Yes, it will, because money that we put into on the way to our retirement funds gets siphoned off to pay for the administration, the plan administration fees. That will stay in our investment and will stay in our pipeline heading off to our investments. Good news.
Thank you. The next question is, what are the differences or benefits between contributing to Social Security versus contributing to the defined contribution plan?
So I think Terry answered a question in the chat, and essentially the University of Colorado was a question in our chat, and folks often ask us this question: why does CSU not contribute to Social Security and our institution to the south does? And that's because they were created under two different arrangements. CU was established under the state constitution and remained an eligible employer to contribute to Social Security. We as an institution at CSU were created under a different format, and the DCP is in lieu of Social Security contributions. So with that, that means Social Security benefits are not taken from our paychecks, and nor does the employer pay into contributions. So one of the things that I think is a consideration for our plan participants is that voluntary plan we've talked so much about today. That allows you to put away additional funds to help supplement your earnings in retirement through a pre-tax program that you begin saving money for today. So that's one way to put away dollars on your way to retirement that can help supplement your DCP earnings in retirement. I think the question specifically that you asked is one more fruitful than the other? And the contributions that are being made by the institution and the employee contributions, in theory, will get you better earnings at the end of your career than a flat amount that you have. The market actually has a higher rate of growth than the Social Security input that is occurring for those contributing to Social Security. So the windfall provision for those of us who work for an employer that are non-Social Security employers actually reduces our Social Security benefit, but we're not paying in for many years to Social Security, which is why that benefit is reduced. And as I mentioned, the 403B or potentially a 457 plan is another way to supplement your earning and your income in retirement. So along the road to retirement, you can still put away money and invest so that you have more funding available when that exciting day comes along.
Thank you. There are quite a few questions which were popular in the other sessions as well. If my funds are with a record keeper that is not a successful bidder with the RFQ, what happens to my funds that are with that record keeper, and talking about the mapping process a little bit.
Wendy, do you want to field that question?
Sure, absolutely. So we would develop a mapping strategy where an existing fund, let's say it was a large cap growth fund, would move automatically to another large cap growth fund that was selected. So that would all happen automatically for you. Nothing that you would need to do in order to make that happen. You would also, previous to the mapping being done, you would see what that strategy is. So if you wanted to change your investments preemptively so that they end up where you want them, you can do that. Or once the investments are moved over, you'll have the ability to move them on the new platform or platforms as well.
And there's no fee for mapping, correct, Wendy?
That is correct. There's no a transaction fee or surrender charge that would be paid.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, as a part of this process, were contributions from the employee and the employer considered, and are they potentially changing?
So at this time, we have no plans to change the contribution rates. That was not in scope for this particular project.
And the committee did not consider that.
Thank you. There are a lot of questions about the windfall elimination provision and Social Security. We anticipate having Social Security present again to campus probably before the end of the year. We usually try to align that with the faculty AP open enrollment period. So I would recommend definitely joining one of those sessions, as they are the experts and can provide some more in-depth information on those provisions. Let's see. And so just reiterating, if a current record keeper is not a future record keeper, participants do have to move funds.
That is correct. There will be some exceptions to that where the funds do not exist, but the funds will be mapped over whenever possible.
And then a few questions about if the slides will be on the website, and they are already out there. So I'll put the link in the chat so you have access to those. Let's see. Trying to clean these up a little bit so I can see what hasn't been answered yet. The recommendations to the Board of Governors, can we discuss the timeline on that a little bit, since the recommendations can't be shared until the RFQ is concluded?
Joseph, do you want to field that? We could go back to the slide.
The committee sent its recommendations in December of 21 to HR. And then in the first quarter of 2022, correct me if I'm wrong, Robin, the HR sent the recommendations to the Board of Governors. So they've had them since the spring. We had hoped that we would have some action on this during the summer, the Board and Governors activity, but you may have noticed Some other things went on at the Board of Governors over the summer, and they were consumed with those changes, and so they held off on that until they deferred until later. So those are the key events. The key events are when the committee made its recommendations to HR and when HR sent them to the Board of Governors. The next key event will be when it issues a decision.
We're aiming for, as Joseph's slide indicates, a decision by the end of this calendar year is our goal. However, we have limited control of the board's agenda and decision making. So we have made the recommendations and a recommendation to have a decision by year end so that we could begin any changeover in the second quarter of 2023, because there is much to do before a change like this occurs. As we've talked about, we would have another roadshow of communications. Wendy alluded to all of the opportunities to make sure that the investors or the plan participants have the option to consider where their funds are currently and if they want to make changes before a transition would occur. So we need some lead time. And so this is our current recommendation to the board, is to make a decision by the end of the year with some lead time for communications in the new year, and ultimately making a switch over sometime in the second quarter of 23. That would be our ideal landscape.
I noticed some other questions, and I'd like to address one or two of these in there. One of the questions about Social Security and the windfall, and I personally struggle with that, having worked in parts of my career outside of Social Security and now here at CSU. So my empathies there. There's a lot of detail, but listen to the Social Security presentation. I learned a lot at an earlier one that comes to the university. That's very useful. Another question is, we're entering an inflationary period. I wonder how this will impact things. And that's an important point. The question of mapping, we wonder, when we think about mapping, we have to be, has to be careful. And that's why there's the switchover will have an adequate amount of time. You can in a worst case scenario, you can think that you'll sell low and buy high, but that's not likely to be the case, because these transfers occur very quickly, and they tend to move together. The idea being that we're picking best in class funds are ones that are better financial performers. And so we intend that in each case, that mapping will be at least neutral or advantageous to the participant. That's the intent of the design. And that needs to be executed by more sophisticates. And I see Wendy nodding her head, knowing she's part of that. So that's the idea of that, is that it is not a sell low, buy high. It is a transfer of dollar funds into a better performing account, so that it'll at least be the same, if not improved. I'll go on because there's a couple in here that haven't been answered yet, so that's a good place to do it. Invite Robin and Wendy to join me on that too. Concerned about the administrative fees charged by Fidelity. So are we all. All three of the record keepers charge fees like that. Part of the purpose of going through this reset is to go out and renegotiate the contracts with the record keepers. So we have them out there. Consider your own personal circumstances. If you're buying a piece of capital equipment, you're going to buy a car or you're going to buy something else. You look for a couple of vendors, and you may try to play them off each other. You might bargain with them to try to get the best deal. That's the negotiating, the arm wrestling part of this, again, which Innovest is going to help us in the university work on that. They've worked on the RFQ and will work on the contracts once a decision is made. So you can also understand this is a good reason for not showing all our cards right now. If the university said, "Hey, we're going to do this," guess how the negotiations are going to fall flat. So that we have to be a little bit sophisticated in how we operate in there. In addition to working under anyone in the town hall who's been part of a university purchasing process knows how tightly controlled it is. Strictly, lots of rules, and it has to be handled just right. Otherwise, you get in big trouble with purchasing, and you don't want to do that. So we have those two reasons why they have to be done just right in there. There's a question about how our contributions, 8 and 12%, compare with other institutions. I don't know the answer to that myself.
I'd invite Wendy because she sees a lot of our peer institutions' numbers. Maybe if you have some insight there, Wendy, that might be helpful.
Without giving away anyone's secrets.
No, I don't know off the top of my head. We could absolutely do some benchmarking. But like we've talked about, I mean, some participate in Social Security, some don't. I would say for those that don't, it's very similar. We work with Colorado School of Mines. We work with CU. We work with we've done some projects for UNC and Metro. So I think those relative to those, I would say they're higher than some of the other peers, but probably maybe not CU because they also contribute. But we could definitely provide some benchmarking at a later date.
And hi, everyone, this is Terry. I'm happy to jump in to augment Wendy's answer. I just want to make sure that everyone's aware that in human resources, we do benchmark the defined contribution plan with our university peer group. And we do work with the University Benefits Committee on the results of what those contributions are. The last time we completed the contribution was a few years ago, and we were on par with our peer institutions, but definitely something in a non-social security environment that we want to keep top of mind and keep at the highest value for employees. So we'll continue to keep that on our list of things to look at on our ongoing review process.
Thanks, Terry. Brittany, other questions? I know we have just a few minutes left.
Yes, let's see here. There's a question about the current vesting schedule for the DCP and if that will change.
We have no plans to change the vesting schedule at this time.
And again, if I can jump in, Robin, please remember on the defined contribution plan, there is no vesting schedule. So employees own 100% of the contributions that go into that plan from day one, which is a huge advantage, again, over a Social Security environment where you're contributing to a pool to receive an outcome benefit defined by a government in the future. That's not the case in our employer-sponsored plan. You control the investments and the outcome, and it is your money to invest. So again, very distinctive difference and important.
Thanks, Terry. I think we have most of the questions answered. A few more personal questions about contributions for temporary employees or your specific account. Those we don't necessarily want to address on the recorded session. So feel free to email any of us in benefits or the myhr@colostate.edu, and we'd be happy to provide some personalized assistance on those questions. There is a question about if employment at the university ends prior to any changes, then what would happen to those funds?
all funds will be mapped, assuming a separated employee decides to keep their contributions in their current CSU plan. They would be mapped to the new vendor or vendors that are selected. That goes the same for our retiree population. We are not able to keep any benefits in the former plans once those have been formally, those relationships have been severed. So if you were to choose to keep your funds in our plans, they would be mapped the same way that our active employee workforce is being mapped.
Thanks, Robin. And we are right at time. Looks like there are currently no open questions, but we will take all of these and combine them with the questions that have been asked in previous sessions and expand the FAQs on our website. So keep an eye out for those probably within the next week, as well as the recording and the slides, which will be available out there. And I'll pass it back to you, Robin, for any closing comments.
Just thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you to our presenters, and please do reach out. As Brittany has indicated, if you have questions, the website has a robust amount of resources, and you can always contact Human Resources for individual questions. Thank you all very much.